When you think of a witch hunt, a specific picture probably comes to mind. It's dark. It's cold. The year is 1692. The place is a small village in Massachusetts called Salem. You see teenage girls writhing on the floor, accusing their neighbors of tormenting them with invisible forces. You see somber men in black hats, the magistrates, listening with grave concern. You see the accused, mostly women, confused and terrified. They are brought to trial, and the evidence against them is spectral. It's the testimony of ghosts and visions, things no one else can see. The outcome feels predetermined. Gallows are built. 19 people are hanged. A man is pressed to death with stones. The whole community is torn apart by fear and paranoia. This is the story we all know. The Salem Witch Trials are a fixture in American history and culture. They serve as a powerful metaphor for mass hysteria and injustice. Arthur Miller used it in his play The Crucible as a way to talk about the anti-communist paranoia of the 1950s. The story is simple, contained, and has clear victims and villains. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when fear, religion, and a broken justice system collide. Or maybe your image is more European. You might think of the Burning Times, a period stretching across a few centuries, from around the 1500s to the late 1600s. The image here is less specific, more of a grim montage. Flames licking at a stake in a town square. A hooded inquisitor demanding a confession. Books filled with strange symbols. The idea of widespread panic, where tens of thousands of people, again, mostly women, were executed for witchcraft. This image is bigger than Salem, more chaotic, but it occupies the same general space in our minds. It's seen as a product of the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, a time of intense religious conflict and social upheaval. Superstition ran rampant, and the witch became the ultimate scapegoat for all of society's problems. A crop failure, a sick child, a sudden storm, all could be blamed on a pact with the devil. This period, roughly from 1500 to 1700, is what historians call the Great Hunt, or the classic witch craze. It's when the vast majority of trials and executions took place. It's what most books and documentaries focus on. It seems to be the heart of the story. It feels like the beginning, the middle, and the end of the phenomenon. We see it as a dark chapter of the early modern world, a final spasm of medieval superstition before the Age of Enlightenment brought reason and science to the forefront. We draw a line. Before this period, we imagine a world of folklore and simple folk magic. After this period, we see the rise of a more rational, scientific world. The witch hunts are placed neatly in a box, a terrible but finite event in history. They feel like a sudden fever that broke out in Europe and its colonies, burned hot for 200 years, and then vanished. But what if that picture is wrong? Not wrong in its details about Salem or the Burning Times. Those events were real and horrific. But wrong about where the story begins. What if the Great Hunt wasn't a sudden fever at all? What if it was the final explosive symptom of a sickness that had been growing for a very long time? The idea of a witch and the need to punish her is much older and more deeply rooted than we tend to think. The legal and theological machinery that made the Great Hunts possible wasn't invented in the 1500s. It was built piece by piece over centuries. The fire in Salem was lit with sparks that were struck more than 1,000 years earlier. To understand the hunt, you have to go back. Much further back than you think. The idea of magic is as old as humanity. The belief that certain people could manipulate unseen forces to help or harm others is found in almost every culture throughout history. But there's a big difference between a village healer who uses herbs and a witch who makes a pact with a satanic figure. The first is a part of the community. The second is an enemy of God and humanity. The journey from one to the other is the real story of the witch hunts, and that journey starts in the ancient world. Long before Christianity, long before the devil, as we know him, societies had to deal with harmful magic. Look at one of the oldest legal texts we have, the Code of Hammurabi from ancient Babylon, written nearly 4,000 years ago. It has laws that deal directly with sorcery. If one man accused another of casting a spell on him, the accused had to undergo an ordeal. He would be thrown into the river. If he sank, the accuser got his house. If the river god saved him, meaning he floated, the accuser would be put to death, and the man he accused would get his house. Notice what's happening here. The Babylonians took sorcery seriously. It was a crime you could be executed for. But the focus was on the practical harm. Did you cast a spell that hurt someone? It was a legal matter between two people, like theft or property damage. There was no mention of dark gods or demonic pacts. It was a secular crime, not a religious one. The ancient Greeks and Romans had a similar view. They were surrounded by magic. Myths are full of figures like Circe, who turned men into pigs, or Medea, a powerful sorceress. In daily life, people used curse tablets, little lead sheets where they'd write an enemy's name and ask a spirit or god to cause them harm. They used love potions and protective amulets. Magic was just a part of how the world worked. But they drew a sharp line between different kinds of magic. There was magic that helped, and there was magic that hurt. Roman law, starting with the 12 tables in 450 BC, specifically outlawed using spells to destroy another person's crops or to cause them physical harm. They called this crime maleficium, which simply means evil doing. Again, the concern was practical. Did your magic hurt my farm? Did it make me sick? If so, you were a criminal. Roman authors wrote about witches, or strixes, horrifying night hags that could transform into owls, fly through the night, and eat babies. These were figures of terror and folklore, the stuff of nightmares, but the person put on trial wasn't usually one of these mythic monsters. It was your neighbor, the one you suspected of poisoning your well or cursing your livestock. The punishment could be severe, but the crime was always about the tangible harm done in this world. It wasn't about which god you worshipped or what deals you made with spirits in the dark. It was a crime against your neighbor, not a crime against the state religion. The gods were big enough to handle their own affairs. The law was there to protect people and property. This is the crucial starting point. In the pagan world, the sorcerer was a criminal because he harmed society. In the later Christian world, the witch was a heretic because she betrayed God. That change in definition is everything. A criminal can be fined, exiled, or even executed, but the crime is finite. A heretic, someone who has made a pact with the ultimate source of evil, is a threat to the entire cosmic order. They are a cancer in the body of the faithful, and the only solution is to cut them out completely. The fear of magic was always there, but it took a profound theological shift to turn the neighborhood sorcerer into a devil-worshipping witch, and to turn a local dispute into an organized, systematic hunt. Christianity didn't invent the fear of witches, but it changed the witch's job description. It took the old idea of a person who did harmful magic and gave them a new boss, the devil. This transformation was slow, and it wasn't inevitable. In fact, for centuries, the official position of the church was that witchcraft, in the sense of flying on broomsticks and making pacts with demons, wasn't real. It was a pagan superstition, a delusion. Early influential Christian thinkers like St. Augustine in the 4th and 5th centuries were quite skeptical. He believed in God and the devil, of course, but he argued that demons didn't have the power to give humans supernatural abilities. The stories people told about magic and transformation were illusions, tricks played on the mind by demons to lead people away from God. A woman who believed she flew through the night to a witch's Sabbath wasn't actually flying. She was having a demonic dream. Her sin wasn't the act of witchcraft, but the belief in it. Heresy was believing that any power could exist outside of God's will. For a long time, this was the dominant view. An early church law, the Canon Episcopi, from around 900 AD, declared that anyone who believed in the reality of night-flying witches was themselves a heretic. The belief in witches was the crime, not the practice of it. So what changed? How did the church go from punishing the belief in witches to hunting and executing the witches themselves? It was a gradual process of ideas hardening into dogma. Over the course of the Middle Ages, the intellectual climate in Europe shifted. Philosophers and theologians became more and more interested in the nature of evil and the power of the devil. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century worked to create a comprehensive, logical system that explained the entire universe, from God down to the smallest demon. In his system, the devil was not just a tempter who whispered bad ideas into your ear. He was a real active agent in the world. He had power granted to him by God to influence physical events. He could cause storms, he could create illusions, and he could make contracts with humans. A person could, through a formal pact, renounce God and pledge their allegiance to Satan. In exchange, the devil would grant them certain powers to perform maleficium or harmful magic. Suddenly, the old folk belief and the new theology merged. The village sorcerer who was said to sour the milk was no longer just an antisocial person. She was a soldier in the devil's army. Her crime wasn't just against her neighbor, it was an act of high treason against God himself. This linked witchcraft directly to heresy, and heresy was the single greatest crime one could commit. It was worse than murder, because murder only killed the body, while heresy damned the soul and threatened the entire community of believers. This new unified theory of witchcraft had all the elements of the later craze. There was the pact with the devil. There was the renunciation of the Christian faith. There was a secret nighttime meeting, the Sabbath, where witches gathered to worship their master and perform obscene rituals. And there was the harmful magic they performed as part of their service. The witch was no longer just a person on the margins of society who knew about herbs and curses. She was a member of an organized conspiratorial anti-church dedicated to the overthrow of Christendom. This was a terrifying idea, a conspiracy of evil, hidden in plain sight, working from within to destroy society. It tapped into a deep well of fear and anxiety. If you believe such a conspiracy exists, then finding and destroying its members becomes the most urgent task imaginable. It's not just justice, it's survival. By the 13th and 14th centuries, this terrifying new definition of the witch was largely complete in the minds of theologians. The only thing missing was the machinery to act on it. An idea, even a terrifying one, is not enough to start a mass hunt. You need a system, you need laws that define the crime, courts to hear the cases, and experts to guide the process. You need a manual. In the late Middle Ages, all of these pieces began to fall into place, creating the legal and intellectual engine for the great witch hunts. The first key piece of machinery was the Inquisition. Established in the 13th century, the Papal Inquisition was a court system designed to deal with heresy. Its original targets were organized heretical movements like the Cathars. Inquisitors were special investigators, usually Dominican friars, who were given broad authority by the Pope to find, question, and sentence heretics. They were legal experts, trained in theology and law, and they developed a specific way of doing business. Their methods were a major departure from previous legal traditions. In an inquisitorial court, the judge was also the prosecutor. He actively investigated the crime. The accused had few rights. They often didn't know who had accused them. They weren't allowed a defense lawyer in the modern sense, and most importantly, the Inquisition was authorized to use torture to extract confessions. The logic was that a heretic, filled with the devil's deceit, would never confess willingly. So physical pain was seen as a necessary tool to break the devil's hold and save the person's soul, even if it meant destroying their body. For a while, the Inquisition was mostly focused on theological heresies. But as the definition of witchcraft began to merge with heresy, witches fell under their jurisdiction. The tools designed to fight one enemy were now turned on another. The belief in a vast satanic conspiracy of witches meant that rooting them out required the same aggressive methods used against other heretics. The second piece of the machine was official papal authorization. While theologians were writing about diabolical witchcraft, it needed the highest stamp of approval to become a priority. This came in 1484, when Pope Innocent VIII issued a papal bull called Summus Desiderantes Effectibus. The bull was written in response to a request from two German inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger. They complained that local authorities in Germany were skeptical of their work and were hindering their attempts to prosecute witches. The Pope's bull gave them his full support. It affirmed the reality of diabolical witchcraft and gave inquisitors full power to correct, imprison, punish, and chastise anyone suspected of the crime. It was a green light from the very top of the church. Armed with this authority, Kramer and Sprenger then created the final, and most deadly, piece of the machine. In 1487, they published a book. It was called the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches. It is difficult to overstate the book's importance. It was a complete, comprehensive, and terrifyingly practical handbook for hunting witches. The Malleus was divided into 3 parts. The first part was a long theological argument proving that witchcraft was real, that witches were usually women, and that to deny the existence of witchcraft was itself a form of heresy. It silenced the skeptics. The second part was a catalog of the horrible things witches did. It described their pacts with the devil, their sexual relations with demons, their ability to fly to the Sabbath, their power to cause impotence, raise storms, and kill infants. It took all the scattered folklore and lurid rumors and presented them as established fact. The third part was the legal and procedural manual. It told magistrates and inquisitors exactly how to conduct a witch trial. It explained how to bring charges, how to question witnesses, and, crucially, how to interrogate the accused. The book gave detailed instructions on the use of torture. It explained that a witch was so hardened by the devil that she might not feel pain, so extreme measures were needed. It offered tricks to trap a witch in her lies. For example, it was believed a witch could not weep real tears, so a lack of crying was a sign of guilt. The book created a legal process that was almost impossible to escape. A confession was the goal, and torture was the tool to get it. If you confessed, you were guilty. If you died under torture without confessing, you were probably guilty too. Your silence is a sign of the devil's aid. If you somehow withstood the torture, you could still be held on suspicion. There was no way out. The Malleus Maleficarum was a sensation. Thanks to the new technology of the printing press, it spread across Europe. It became a bestseller second only to the Bible for a time. For the next 200 years, it was the go-to reference for witch hunters, both Catholic and Protestant. It gave them the justification they needed, the stereotypes to look for, and the script to follow. The idea was old, but with the Inquisition's methods and the Malleus as a guide, the hunt was now armed and ready. The common timeline places the start of the Great Witch craze in the 16th century, fueled by the turmoil of the Reformation. But the machine built in the 14th and 15th centuries didn't sit idle. The engine of the hunt was running long before the flames of the burning times became a widespread phenomenon. The first large-scale systematic witch hunts in Europe were not in Germany in the 1580s or Salem in the 1690s. They were in the quiet valleys of the Alps in the 1420s. One of the best documented early examples is the Salem Witch Trials, which began in what is now Switzerland in 1428. This was nearly 60 years before the Malleus Maleficarum was even published, but all the key elements of the classic witch hunt were already in place. The trials began with accusations against a few individuals, but quickly spiraled into a full-blown panic that lasted for years and claimed hundreds of lives. The records from these trials are chilling because they are so familiar. The accused were said to have made a pact with the devil. They confessed, under torture, to flying on chairs or stools to secret meetings in cellars. At these Sabbaths, they would renounce Christ, stomp on the cross, and pay homage to their demonic master. They admitted to murdering children and making magical powders from their remains to use in harmful spells. They described an organized society of witches with leaders and initiation rituals. The legal process was ruthless. The accused were tortured until they confessed not only to their own crimes, but also named accomplices. Those named were then arrested and tortured, creating a chain reaction of accusations that spread from village to village. The authorities believed they were facing a vast and dangerous conspiracy, and their actions reflected that belief. They were not just punishing isolated criminals, they were waging war against an enemy sect. These trials in the Valais, and similar ones that soon followed in nearby regions like Savoy and Fribourg, show that the blueprint for the Great Witch Hunt was fully operational by the early 15th century. Another famous case from this period, though different in nature, is the trial of Joan of Arc in 1431. While her trial was primarily political, an attempt by the English and their Burgundian allies to discredit the French king she had helped crown, the charges against her were a mix of heresy and witchcraft. She was accused of listening to demonic voices, which she claimed were saints. She was accused of using magic and sorcery, of associating with fairies, and of engaging in superstitious practices. Her trial shows how easily the charge of witchcraft can be weaponized. It was a powerful tool for eliminating an enemy, because it framed them not just as a political opponent, but as an agent of cosmic evil. These early hunts were not isolated incidents. They were the first major field tests of the new theological definition of the witch and the new inquisitorial methods of prosecution. They established a pattern that would be repeated, with local variations, across Europe for the next 2.5 centuries. The idea of the diabolical conspiracy was no longer just a theory in a book. It was now a proven reality in the minds of judges, priests, and ordinary people, confirmed by the dozens of confessions extracted through torture. So, when we look at Salem or the German witch panics of the late 16th century, we are not looking at the start of the story. We are looking at the climax. The groundwork had been laid for centuries. The fear of magic was ancient, rooted in places like Babylon and Rome. That fear was transformed by Christian theology, which turned the neighborhood sorcerer into a heretical servant of the devil. That new idea was then operationalized by the legal machinery of the Inquisition and codified in books like the Malleus Maleficarum. And the first sparks of that machine were seen in the Alpine valleys of the 1400s, where all the pieces came together for the first time in a deadly, systematic hunt. The Great Hunt didn't appear from nowhere. It was a slow, deliberate construction, an architecture of fear built over 1,000 years.